If you've ever worked with a student who engaged in problem behavior and it felt like a barrier to their learning, you are going to want to listen to this episode in its entirety. I had the pleasure of interviewing my BCBA supervisor, Kelle Rich. She is a wealth of information, and we really get into what is an FBA, what is a BIP. These might be terms that you've heard before, and they're so very important for those of us who are supporting autistic learners. Kelle Rich has an amazing body of work, and she is going to share her journey into the field with us. But in summary, she started as a special education teacher. She started taking coursework for her BCBA before the BACB was even a thing. So she has been in this work for a very long time. She began her training with Dr. Vince Carbone, and she traveled with him extensively and provided training. I got to meet Kelle when she was in a district that I was an autism specialist for down in Texas. I lived in Texas for 3 years. And so I got to know her. I really admired her work and how she was helping us in the district. And I asked her to be my BCBA supervisor, and it was an amazing experience. She also opened the Central Texas Autism Center, and that was a center in Austin that is still there and is still running and still supporting so many people. In my time with Kelle down in Texas, she brought in Dr. Carbone for a 2-day workshop, and it was just such amazing information. During that time, I also got to see Tamara Casper, who she mentions. She is an SLP BCBA, a fellow unicorn. And I also got to see Dr. Iwata. Just such great information. That was such a time of growth for me in learning more about applied behavior analysis and how that could be a support to my autistic students. Kelle now has gone on to start the Verbal Behavior Conference, which is taking place in a hybrid format. It is in person in Austin, Texas, but now you can also attend virtually. And she has the most amazing people. She's going to share with you the lineup. But Dr. McGreevy, who I use a tool that he created, Dr. Mark Sundberg, who I haven't talked about the VB map a whole lot, but that's definitely the basis for a lot of the assessment that I do for my own students. And I hope to have maybe him on the podcast or some information about that assessment tool, because it has really helped me as a provider. Kelle is a trailblazer in the field. She has done such amazing work. And today she is going to shed some light on these terms that you may have heard. FBA, BIP. What is that? Why do we need that information? And how is that going to help us as speech therapists when we are supporting students who are engaging in problem behavior? I'm just so excited for this episode. Let's get right on in.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Thanks so much for joining us on episode 63. We have an amazing episode today. We have with us Kelle Rich. Thanks so much for joining us. It's so nice to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. And I have to say, Rose, I'm just so proud of all the work that you're doing and that you've done. You're on Instagram and TikTok and just everywhere, reaching so many people around the world that otherwise wouldn't be reached. And so I just think that's so impressive.
Well, thank you so much for that. And Kelle was my BCBA supervisor, which seems like a different lifetime ago, down in Austin, Texas, when I lived in Austin for 3 years and had this amazing job as an autism facilitator and support specialist. I talk about that job a lot because I feel like what I'm doing at ABA Speech right now is really just what I was doing at Texas, but on a much larger scale. So I got to know Kelle. I got to know her business. She did a lot of training for us, and she's always been a mentor of mine. So I'm just so excited to have you on today. But for those of us who don't know you and your body of work, can you tell us a little bit about you, your journey, how you got into utilizing applied behavior analysis and all that great stuff?
Sure. I'll try to make a long story somewhat short, but I was really lucky to be introduced to the world of autism and the world of special education at a really young age. So I went to a school that basically let us do work study programs for the last trimester, and I was placed at the Autistic Treatment Center in Dallas. And back then, autism was still a mystery. Autism was 1 in 10,000 births in the 80s, that was
Wow.
the data back then. And so I got this plethora of experiences working at this center because we had, a group home, we had day treatment, we had work programs, so I got kind of preschool through adult exposure. I worked there all summer. And it really changed the course of my life because I was going into marine biology and had that experience and was like, wow, I just love these people. I just love these kids. And I really felt like I was making a meaningful difference. And they were not an ABA program, but they were a behavioral program.
Mm-hmm.
We really didn't have ABA in Texas very much at the time, in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so that put me into special ed, and I went, got my undergrad degree, and then I was a special education teacher for a while. And I'm so glad we're talking about behavior today, because that was my main experience when I was a teacher, is like, if I could just get these kids to kind of like sit and attend, I could teach them so much more. And so I went back to graduate school for a degree in behavioral interventions at the University of North Texas. And then I came back to the same school district, this wonderful school district, Carrollton Farmers Branch up in Dallas. And there I was for the first year there, I was a crisis interventionist. And you don't ever want crisis in the job title.
It does not sound good. It does sound what a lot of BCBAs do. I do some mentorship and I'm like, no, you're in this contentious situation, because this is oftentimes when a BCBA gets called in. But yeah.
And this is, when I was just straight out of grad school. This is before we had BCBAs. Mm-hmm. This is before the BACB existed, before FBA was even in the law. And so, it was putting out fires. And it was back in the days of pagers. So that is still such an aversive stimulus to me. If I hear anything that sounds like a pager tone, I'm like, ah. So then we became behavior resource specialists. And that was around 1997 when the reauthorization of IDEA happened. And that's how I met Dr. Vince Carbone, because my district brought him in as a consultant. And so I trained under him, and he became my mentor and supervisor. And I was able to sit for the very first, in 1999, we had a Texas Certified Behavior Analyst exam. And I sat with all of my professors from UNT. And I think there was 14 of us in the state at that time.
Wow.
And then the next year, 2000, the BACB, commenced and became a thing. And then we all got our BCBA. So, I think there was 200 or 300 of us in the country at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
It was really a long journey. We've come so far. So from there, I traveled, for probably a decade. I worked with Dr. Carbone as his associate and traveled the world teaching agencies and school districts and parents and families. Back then there was only a few hundred of us, so we had to travel to everybody else to help. With the advent of the BACB and more university programs offering coursework, of course, now I think latest numbers were at 54,000, I think.
Wow. It is, when I go to conferences and they show the growth, it's like the trend is up like this. I'm like, wow, I've been certified 10 years. And that feels like a long time,
Yeah. So it's amazing. And, I think 95% of those certificates are in the US, but certainly there's more resources now. So, after a time of traveling so much, Dr. Carbone and I both we're like, let's really start a center of, we both wanted to start centers of excellence, not just because we didn't want to travel as much and it was harder to travel, but, we could serve more people coming to us, but we could also serve as a training facility to train BCBAs. So he started the Carbone Clinic in New York. I started Central Texas Autism Center back in around 2003 and did that for almost 20 years. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
And through that course, we've trained, through that time, we've trained just hundreds of BCBAs and worked with hundreds of school districts and, mainly in Texas. And then we continue to consult and do things and now we're hosting the Verbal Behavior Conference, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And that's how I got to know you. The district that I worked in, Leandre SD, they just did such an amazing job with professional development, and the training that you provided was so intensive and so amazing. And I always say that's where I really honed my kind of public speaking skills, because then you would train us, and then we would train, at speech therapy meetings. And I dropped out of public speaking the first time I took it in college, because that was really a big fear for me. And it's just so,
too.
Oh, did you really? That's so funny, because now I've come full circle and I really love it. This is what I love.
I didn't drop it. I couldn't drop it, but I think I made like a C.
Oh my God.
I was a nervous wreck. And it's so ironic, right? That now that's like what we do.
It is funny, because I remember the one time I think you keynoted or you did a talk. This was at the Domain, like a hotel there. This is a long time ago, obviously, when we were in Austin together. And there were it was in the main ballroom, and there were like hundreds and hundreds of people there. And you were like cool, calm, and collected. And I was like, #life goals. This is what I want to be when I grow up. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Isn't that funny? But, my dad always said when you have something really important to say, that it becomes easier. And so I think that has been true, because being an SLP and BCBA, and really just seeing how applied behavior analysis literally changed my clients' lives, I feel excited to share that information. And I think that helps with kind of the anxiety and the nerves.
Absolutely. When it's something that you're passionate about and it's something that you do every day, and you can't wait to share it, it makes all the difference. So,
yes. So today, I wanted to have you come on to talk about behavior in autism, because I do a quarterly survey with my email list of about 30,000 people. And oftentimes one of the top things that comes up is, how do I help serve my students who are engaging in problem behavior that is a barrier to their learning? And, being a BCBA and know about all the, FBAs and how we can help and who can do them and why problem behavior may occur. But a generalist and a speech therapist, and maybe if they just have one kid who is exhibiting this type of behavior, they may feel unsure of how to deal with it in a way that's going to help the student make meaningful progress. And so, if a student is exhibiting problem behavior, do you have any couple first steps that you would recommend for a speech therapist? And so at this point, I'm thinking like behavior that's just kind of a barrier. Maybe it's not unsafe behavior, but it's getting in the way of that traditional kind of speech therapy that we're trying to provide.
And of course, as a behavior analyst, that's a huge question, right? Because I have like 25 questions I would want to say before I give any, advice. But so let's break it down. Let's take it back actually a step and talk about, speech therapists and teachers and all of us. The first thing we need to do before we ever sit down with the child is find out what's reinforcing to them. Right. So hopefully, let's take it a step back before hopefully you're with that child and engaging in problem behavior. So, you do that through reading the files, through interviewing the teachers, paraprofessionals, parents. If you have the chance to go observe, that's so valuable. I know we don't always have time in school districts to do that, but if you do, that's so valuable, because what you want to do is see, what are they interested in? What do they like to talk about if they're vocal? A lot of our vocal learners have preferred topics. So I want to know, I remember I had one learner that his family was of Scottish heritage, and he was obsessed with Scottish jokes and Scottish history. So I had to read up on Scotland, but that's how we bonded. That's how we had a rapport. But their preferred foods, toys, iPad, music, whatever, so that I can equip myself and pair myself with those reinforcers to hopefully compete against any behaviors that might occur, any problem behaviors that might occur, right? So many of the speech pathologists are itinerant, and they're not on a campus full time. They're popping in and popping out. So I want to have all those things in my car and walk in, and when I get the student, have those present and visible, so that already I'm a signal of a bettering of conditions than a worsening of conditions. Yes. And then that first session, I'm going to have my whole therapy room, my whole environment paired with access to reinforcers, rather than an absence and a removal of reinforcers. So that's number one, right? Try to compete against the value of escape or the value of any problem behavior happening by pairing the environment, pairing yourself with things that they like and that they're interested in. And that first few sessions might need to be kind of low demands. I know we have this IEP, we've got 30 minutes, we've got to see the kid, we've got once a week, we've got to get so much in. Take a deep breath, take your time, and just build that relationship, establish that rapport, make the sessions fun, reinforcing, and then ease into those, demands. So that's the first thing, I think. And that's before you even get in there. But let's say you've done that and you still have problem behavior. I think a general thing, like you said, as long as it's not a dangerous behavior, we're talking about kind of like tier 1 kind of behaviors, right? I coach parents on this and all the teachers that we work with is you get behavior, you're not sure what's going on. Just keep doing what you were doing. So what that kind of looks like is another teacher comes in to talk to me and I turn to talk to the teacher and now my child starts whining and fussing. So I note that. And if I can, I take a little data on it. We want to start taking data as soon as possible. And we want to write down what the trigger was, the antecedent was, what the behavior looked like. But I just finished my conversation and I try to time it to where that behavior is paused and then I come back. If I took the iPad away and now the child's fussing, I don't give it right back. Now, if it were dangerous behavior, I would. Oh, goodness, sorry.
Okay.
If it were dangerous behavior, I would. We want to do precursors.
Right.
And reinforce before the big exposure. But if we're just talking about minimal kind of just disruptive to their learning, but not dangerous, then I don't give it right back. So you're just trying to avoid accidentally reinforcing behavior.
Right.
As you're taking data and kind of noting what's going on so that you can have some information to share with your behavior specialist, your BCBA, or whoever is on campus to help you. Right. Because that could be a signal that we need to do more, like a functional behavioral assessment that we're going to really talk about next, right?
Yes. Yeah. So those are really good. And I think that idea of, I train on that a lot, is if you can, because in a school we are still in a pressure cooker of time and maybe not having enough time. I still am working 3 days a week as a public school speech therapist. So, that idea of observation is so very important. And I always tell people we need to find out what our students love and enjoy. And we want to be the giver of those things, because oftentimes what I would see happening with a speech therapist is that maybe the classroom is, busy, and maybe the student is on an iPad and he's in reinforcement. And then the speech therapist comes in and goes, okay, time for speech. And I'm like, you're not seen as the speech therapist. You're seen as the person who takes the iPad away. They don't like you. They are not going to like anything that you do. I mean, that's one scenario, but you're setting yourself up for so much failure if you don't do that. And one of the things we did at Leander that was such a cool thing is we put together these manding kits. And so me, Jenny, and Jane went to Target one day and we bought all these really fun, potentially reinforcing things. And then we had them in our central office, and all the speech therapists were getting trained on requesting and, communication. And then people could check them out. And it was just really cool if they had a student that was not yet speaking. So that was one little project that we did. So that's great. So let's say that, you do have a student who does have problem behavior and the team is, really wondering, well, why is this happening? What can we do? This is a barrier to his learning. Can you talk to us about what is an FBA? I feel like that's a term that we hear. It's kind of a jargon type term. And if you're a speech therapist and don't have a whole lot of experience with autistic students, you may not really know what that even means.
Well, a functional behavioral assessment is really a process that we go through to determine why kids are behaving the way they are. So we believe that there is a purpose and a function to behavior, and that FBA is a process to figure that out. It is a formal assessment, and it is something that needs to be requested, and it is a part of the IEP. But yeah, it is a process that we go through to determine the function of behavior. And so we have some assumptions. We believe that behavior doesn't just happen in a vacuum, that behavior is learned and that it has some environmental controls. And we're looking for antecedents and consequences. And we kind of use this assessment to, and it entails, I call it a process because it's a team of us, that work together. Because if I'm the BCBA, for example, like you experienced in Leander, I'm going to come and interview you the speech and language pathologist, and I'm going to ask you questions about what the behavior looks like. When do you see it? When do you not see it? That's an important question, right? When do you almost never see it? And so I'm going to interview you, parents, teachers, all of us participate in providing information. Anyone that works with that learner is going to provide us information through some guided interviews. And then we're going to have a direct observation. So if I'm the one writing the plan, I need to directly observe the behavior. I'm going to ask teachers probably to take some data, not all day, every day, 5 days, it can't be like that. But, it is good to train people to start to see things as antecedents, behavior, and consequence, so that they can start to see things behaviorally and that it doesn't just happen out of the blue. They can start to see like, oh, there is a pattern to this and there is an antecedent. And that's what we're looking for. We're seeking patterns. We're seeking what turns on and off behavior. So there is that direct observation time. And then in some cases, there's going to be a functional analysis time where we actually do test. And we do test and see, can we turn it on and off? Can we turn the target behavior on and off under certain conditions? And therefore, we verify our hypothesis, basically. This is a science, right? So we verify our hypothesis and the independent variable. And we do all this so that it guides us to the behavior intervention plan.
Right.
Like we do all of this so that we get a really good, accurate behavior intervention plan.
Yeah, I love that. And what I was saying on a training last week with some speech therapists is, sometimes a speech therapist, like you said, they are usually going to different campuses. And I know personally that for some IEP meetings, I don't stay the entire meeting. Now I'm going to know, which I work in a small district, so I know who has a behavior plan and who doesn't. But if you're a speech therapist and you're working 5 days a week and you have a very large caseload, you essentially could almost miss the behavior and you could miss the BIP part of the interview. Maybe the BCBA goes last. Maybe the BCBA is an outside consultant like, you do. And CTAC does a lot of that type of work. And you could actually almost miss that your student even has a behavior plan. So I always tell speech therapists that if you do encounter a student who is engaging in some problem behavior that's a barrier, that step one is really to say, does the student have a behavior plan and can I have a copy of it? Because I know that sounds really elementary and it sounds simplistic, but we know that in a school, the pace of the school and how much a speech therapist is responsible for, you could essentially miss the fact that the student has that. So let me ask you, because I feel like this is something I see a lot in Facebook groups because I spend an inordinate amount of time on social media. Who can do an FBA? Who can do an FBA?
Well, that is a big question because I think because there are so many BCBAs now, I would highly recommend that a BCBA does it. Many districts have their own BCBAs now or live in, almost every state has good BCBAs as a resource. So I would highly recommend a BCBA because that person is going to have specific training in behavior analysis and specific training in FBAs. Now, does IDEA say that? No. IDEA, which was reauthorized in 1997 and again in 2004, and in 1997 was when they said FBA is the law. So if you have challenging behavior that is impeding with a student's learning, you have to do an FBA. That's all it said. So it kind of is indicative, and different states have taken different, views on that. But, most people say, go to the research. Where's the research in ABA? Now, certainly we've worked in districts that have really good training, like Leander, right? Yeah. And so, it could be a psychologist. It could be a behavior specialist. It could be, in some cases, a special ed teacher if they've had that specific coursework or specific, training in how to do it. Especially if you're going to do any kind of functional analysis, I think a BCBA has to be on that team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in the old days, there wasn't enough resources. And so our goal was to train, we did in Leander, to train you guys how to do it because you couldn't access this all the time.
Right.
I couldn't be there every day.
Right.
But more and more school districts have BCBAs. It's a beautiful thing. They have BCBAs on staff. I see the Facebook groups too. And I see there's a school ABA BCBA group. And I love that. And there's 20,000 members or something crazy. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, if you have access to a BCBA, go there. If not, someone who's had the training a
Mhm.
psychologist. And like I said, different states have different laws, different school districts have different, procedural guidelines. So it's going to vary from state to state, school to school, but that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I
Yeah.
do see that a lot. And I feel like every district is made up and is so different. And that idea of a behavior specialist, I think some people assume that that is probably a BCBA, but not always. And, that's a term that's pretty freely used. And it can just be to talk about somebody's position in a school district, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a board certified behavior analyst, which is an extremely rigorous process that you have to go through, right? So what can really that FBA, what can that tell us, and how does that really inform our intervention as speech therapists?
Well, the FBA is the tool that is going to narrow down and tell us why the child is engaging in those behaviors.
Mhm.
Because what we don't want to do is treat behaviors topographically. So without a functional assessment, we see a child screaming. We all have tools in our toolbox, right? We all,
Right.
through teachers and therapists, we all have these tools. And like I said, I taught back in the late 80s and 90s before FBA was an idea. And we had all sorts of things we had learned. I had the red light, green light,
Right.
kind of chart with like a smiley face and, oh, you're on red, and, those
Yeah.
types of things. And it was a topography based system. So with a topography based system, I'm going to treat how behaviors look, and maybe all the same, right? There's just going to be set classroom consequences, like go to the principal's office.
Right.
So if a child is screaming for escape and I keep removing demands and sending them out, and that behavior is going to increase, right? I'm going to accidentally reinforce things that I don't want to reinforce. If the child is screaming for access, I'm going to, and I keep giving the iPad back to calm them down and deliver, then I'm probably going to get more screaming, right?
Right.
So it's kind of, this is the one place, in education that I talk about the medical model.
Mhm.
And I think this makes sense, right? So if I have a sore throat and I go to the doctor, and the doctor, the first thing they're going to ask me is, what are the conditions? Do you have drainage? Interview me about my sore throat. Then they're going to actually take a test.
Right.
And based on the results of that test, that determines which medicine I'm prescribed, right?
Mhm.
So if I have strep, that maybe gets a class C medication. Now I go home and I take that medicine, I'm feeling better, but then I get another sore throat. Is that doctor just going to refill my prescription?
Right.
No, not a good doctor is going to go back,
Right.
and do the same exact process. And this time it's not strep, it's a viral infection. So then I don't get that same prescription. It's the same thing with behavior. Screaming for attention is going to get a different procedure than screaming for escape. It's a different prescription. It's a different cause, a different function. Right. And I think that's really important for people that haven't had behavioral training to really start to understand. It just makes sense if you think about it that way, right?
Absolutely.
So I can't just make assumptions. I really have to have some data and really have to see patterns and really test it to know. And then once that functional assessment is done, that's what it tells us. It tells us these behaviors happen for this reason. And I go to the research and then I prescribe those research-based interventions for that function-based procedures. And then these behaviors happen for this reason. And I go to the research and I prescribe these behaviors or this protocol to treat these behaviors. And it could be the same behaviors, or it could be some crossover. So that's why we have to train the professionals to know, okay, when it happens for this reason, I do this. When it happens for this reason, I do this, as well as all of our antecedent and preventative strategies. So the FBA guides the BIP.
Yes. Right.
And I have to say this because in so many districts, and you've probably run into this too, I have been asked to develop a behavior plan, but you don't need to do an FBA. Or I've come into districts and read the IEP, and there's behavioral objectives, such as the child will refrain from hitting the teacher no more than 5 times per day. So first of all, it's okay to hit your teacher 5 times.
Right.
And second of all, what does the teacher do? Why is he hitting?
Right.
So you can't have behavioral objectives and you can't have a BIP without an FBA.
See, that's good to know. Just that process, that a lot of people are not as informed about those types of things. We have to have that FBA. It gives us really good information. And the BIP, I think, as a speech therapist, while that information can seem very overwhelming, I'm very lucky. I work in this really amazing district, and I do serve some kids who have high support needs that are autistic. And I actually have parapros that will come with me. Like one student I see in the classroom, one student actually see in my therapy room. But they come with me just to be a support for the plan, because it's kind of like a rigorous plan. I mean, also when I was working in an ABA center, I worked at a non-public program forever until I, started my own business. But I always had, RBTs there. And sometimes that's really nice as a speech therapist. And especially when we're working with students who engage in unsafe problem behavior, that it's really hard, especially if you are a speech therapist and let's say you're traditionally seeing a student 30 to 60 minutes a week, you may not understand that plan as well as somebody who is there with the student throughout the entire week. So I always tell speech therapists, you really should advocate for that because number one, you need to have a copy of the plan. Number two, listen to this episode intently because this is the process, right? You need the FBA, you need the BIP. That is a part of the IEP. You may not get to hear it if you're not at the entire IEP meeting, but this really needs to inform our therapy because a lot of those antecedent interventions you're talking about is like, what can we do as therapists to maybe set up the environment or how we're presenting items in intervention? And sometimes if we don't have that behavioral background, we don't understand how powerful those antecedent strategies can be for us really reaching our students and helping them to make meaningful progress.
Right. And I also encourage people, to ask for training. And sometimes, almost always, I would write that in. So if a district hires me or anybody from CTAC as a private consultant, sometimes we're writing things in a way that a layperson or even another professional that hasn't had that specific training isn't going to understand how to implement. So it almost always comes hand in hand with some training. Yeah. And so, if the district will allow that, and usually it's written in the IEP and it's approved. The speech and language pathologist, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, everybody needs to be a part of that plan and part of that training. And certainly if you receive a BIP and you say, I really don't understand exactly when and how and where I'm supposed to implement this, then you need to ask, maybe that teacher has been through training, you didn't get to go, or you're new, I don't know, but don't be afraid to ask for training. And as a team, even if you're all saying, I need help with implementing this, bring that person back in to provide that training.
Yeah, I think that training, that ongoing support, especially for school-based professionals, I work in a very affluent district. So we have, kids who are getting outside ABA, we have advocates, there's lawyers involved. And sometimes that BCBA that is helping the school team is really a support. Sometimes I think that school-based professionals get nervous if there's an outside consultant or somebody's coming in, because oftentimes the reality of it is you're getting called in when things are not going well. Things are not going well. That's usually when a school district calls somebody in. Antecedently, they don't do it like 5 years ahead of time, right? So I always urge, school-based SLPs to really embrace the information that they're getting and to ask questions too and have that professional dialogue because not everything we're always going to agree on. And I think that's what makes those teams so dynamic because we really, when we get down to it, because I've gotten to some arguments with BCBAs about augmentative communication and some things like that, right? And I'm like, hey, I'm an SLP BCBA and this is happening to me. But we really need to know that we can have that professional dialogue. And I really just always focus on we're here for the kids. We might be thinking different things and we might want to get there a different way, but I really think there's so much power in that team approach and we can really all learn from each other in how to help this student progress.
And sometimes I start meetings like that, like just a reminder, we're all on the same team. Right. This is the same team. And we are all bringing different, perspectives to this team, but we are on the same team with the same goal. Right. And let's collaborate on how to get there. Exactly. But yeah, I think, whoever develops the BIP needs to be the one who can train and support. And also sometimes we have to tweak it. Sometimes we've made recommendations and the data is suggesting that it's not going the direction that we want it to. Right. So we have to take data and we have to, come back and recalibrate sometimes.
Such great information, Kelle. I love it so much. Can you tell us a little bit about, because this podcast will air in March, so before the Verbal Behavior Conference, can you tell us a little bit about the conference and kind of what's in store for this year?
Yes. So excited for this year. And I guess if it airs in March, it's going to be a little late, but I'll say it anyway, because we'll probably do it again. This is the first year we're doing a pre-workshop with Dr. Henry Schlinger. And, last year we did, so we've been doing the Verbal Behavior Conference. Let me back up a little bit. So Verbal Behavior Conference, we started in 2018. And, for years, I was bringing in my mentors, Dr. Mark Sundberg, Dr. Vince Carbone, Dr. Patrick McGreevy. That team, I was bringing them in individually for Austin and all of Texas, and really anybody, but, mainly Texas people came. And I was doing, a one-off. And then we kind of had the idea like, well, why don't we have it together and have them together? And so I think in 2018, it was the first time Dr. Vince Carbone, Dr. Pat McGreevy, Dr. Mark Sundberg, who all are friends, all are professional colleagues, were ever on the stage together at the same time. I didn't even know that. And they were just giddy. Yeah. And it was just an amazing event. And we had it in Austin, and we had, several hundred people. And so now it's grown with COVID. We had 2 years we had to go virtual, but that was a wonderful experience. And actually through that experience, now we've got, a large base in Europe, in Australia, all around the world that can attend and access it. So we're going to maintain it this year. It's hybrid. So we are having it live April 7th and 8th in Austin. At the AT&T Conference Center right there at University of Texas. So a beautiful venue. And we are going to have it live streamed through behaviorlive.com. So each year we have our founding fathers back, Dr. Vince Carbone and Dr. Mark Sundberg, and Dr. Patrick McGreevy, and they just bring so much to the conference. And, Mark is the author of the VB Map, and McGreevy is the author of the Essential for Learning. Yep. Both wonderful programming tools, and I know we use them. And this year we're having also back Dr. Francesca Deli Espinoza and our SLP BCBA Tamara Casper. And they're presenting together this year they've got some new information on play and social and building social chains to create more verbal behavior and more language. So they'll be talking about that both days. Then we've got David Roth, who was a former, he's on the board of directors of the B.F. Skinner Foundation. He's written chapters in behavior analysis of effective teaching, and he's bringing kind of more of this, his lecture's not on necessarily applied research, but he's going to be talking about how do we do a behavior analysis of mindfulness and meditation, and, some different topics that really talk about how verbal behavior plays into that and how we can do a behavior analysis of some of these seemingly non-behavioral hot, trendy topics right now. Oh, yeah. Then we've got Dr. Sarah Lachago from the University of Houston Clear Lake, and she's going to be talking about bringing kind of cultural sensitivity to our practice. She's been doing a lot of work on the border with families from Mexico, and then talking about managing for information. So very applied, pertinent topic. And then we have Dr. Kevin Luczynski out of the University of Nebraska Medical Center's Monroe Meyer Institute. He's been on the editorial board for JABA, just bringing a wealth of experience. So we just have amazing speakers. And the cool thing about this conference, the way we designed it, we wanted it to be a little different than these huge, overwhelming conferences where there's 25 people I want to see and I have to pick just one or two. And so we really just keep the group small. And it's the same presenters each day. So you really get to know them and really know their research, and they get to really expand on their topics, and you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. We have Matt Sikoria from the Behavioral Observation podcast. He's our panel moderator. So all of the speakers do a Q&A at the end of the first day on a panel. And it's just a really, really, we just get I love doing it. And I love the feedback we get from the participants. They're like, this is the best ever. And I love that we can provide that. And then back to the pre-workshop that I'm sure we'll do again next year. We took a survey in the conference last year, and only half of the participants had really read Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a hard book to read.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. Schlinger's like, hey, I teach a class on that, a university level graduate class. And so we've put together a 4-week class. It's 8 hours.
Yeah.
And that's the pre-workshop this year. So I think we have, I don't know, probably about 40 people signed up for that.
Wow.
It's going to be Zoom, through Behavior Live.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a little VB book study.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, it's so advanced. I feel like it's really advanced topic. So I think that's really nice for people. Well, it sounds so exciting. And it was so great to connect with you. Make sure to check the show notes and we'll put the links in there for the various things that you mentioned. And thanks so much for coming on, Kelle.
Thanks for having me, Rose.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.